Welcome to another IC Knowledge Bureau Fireside Chat. I am Vusi Thembekwayo, the convener of IC Knowledge Bureau, and your host for this conversation. Today, we're going to be talking about what is arguably the most controversial subject matter in South Africa today, the question of transformation. To join me in this conversation, we have Vumile, who will introduce herself in a minute, as well as Lucratia. Both ladies have had an illustrious career in corporate and as an entrepreneurs. And today they're going to be talking about their own experiences and realities navigating not only transformation, but how transformation intersects with issues of gender, of color, as well as other issues of minority. So thank you so much for joining us. Ladies, thank you for your time.
Thanks for having us.
You both look amazing.
Oh,
Like I had to get my makeup properly done just because you both had your makeup really done.
No, we came to slay.
As you do.
Thank you.
So let's quickly talk about this conversation about transformation. I say quickly, albeit in jest, because it's a conversation that is so layered and so deep. It's very hard to have it in a sprint. Yeah. First, in your mind, what do you think is the biggest misconception around the conversation of transformation in South Africa today?
I think for me personally, it's the thought that just because we've got the policy and the legislation, that it's translating into real life. Yeah. It's not happening. Yeah. I think both of us, having been in corporate, now being an entrepreneur, walking into those spaces, you look for a familiar face, you look for another black female, and it's not happening the way it should.
Yeah. And yourself, Lucratia?
I think just to add to that, it's a misconception that it doesn't add value. The diversity itself does not add value onto the table. And so it's often done as an afterthought and as empathy towards those that are being brought into the table. When in actual fact, when you flip the script and you understand the value that it provides into the table, and you understand what a diverse team provides into the value of the organization, then the conversation becomes a very different one.
I wonder if we can actually get right into that. Yeah. Because as somebody who spends his time looking at income statements and balance sheets, there is no line item for diversity, right?
Yep.
So it'd be okay to forgive the business manager and leader who goes, yeah, but how does this really add value? Because I don't see the actual line item. So in your mind, Lucratia, how does diversity and transformation add real business value?
So let's start with the population of South Africa is about 57 million, right? Plus minus, depending on which stats you use, about 80% of that is black people.
That's right.
So if you are a corporate in South Africa and your target market is within, obviously you're trying to make money in this population, you need to understand what your target market is actually interested in.
Sure.
And if you do not have a diverse team that actually provides different perspectives in terms of the cultural nuances, the dynamics of what it means, obviously from a female perspective, if I'm female, I'm looking at this in a different way, what does it actually mean from me as a consumer? Yeah. Then you obviously have a one-dimensional view of your target market. That in itself just starts the conversation around why you need different people sitting around the table to provide different perspectives.
But the issue here, and Vumi, I wonder if you can help me, is because we've not had a history of inclusion, particularly when it relates to different voices. This whole conversation around diversity really is about how do we include voices we've not previously included, right? We don't then have an ear for what those voices sound like. Yeah. But more, and I suppose more to the point, if I'm running an organization that is, say, listed and is a 30-year-old business, it means we made money long before the advent of diversity. So why now must I do this diversity thing? I've been making money from this population group you're talking about without having to include these different voices.
Because we can't just look at South Africa as a silo. If we start looking at what the lack of diversity does, we can go to Nokia as an example of saying we've been successful at this, we'll keep on doing it. But at some point you start to plateau. If you don't start bringing different thoughts, different voices to the table, you cannot breed innovation.
Right.
You literally will die as a business.
Right.
Saying you're only as successful as your last financial term. Saying I've been doing it for 30 years doesn't suffice to say you can continue doing it. You're completely missing out on exactly what Lucratia's spoken about the black diamonds, about the people that they're supporting underneath them, and in actual fact, completely changing the economy of South Africa because you refuse to include everyone at the table.
And if I could add to that,
course.
Vusi, so think about the context that it was in South Africa 30 years ago to the very same population group that it is right now. So 30 years ago, how much voice did that diverse team have? How much option, opinion, and how much choices did they have
Right.
in order to, gather? So how much consumer knowledge was there?
100%.
Right. You're living in an age where you've got social media, but you also have a consumer base that is arguably the most, the most, it requires a lot more from organizations to do a lot more in terms of attracting them to come onto the table. So you no longer can use the argument of yesterday to capture the market of tomorrow.
Yes.
And therefore, the context of tomorrow must be what is being catered for today so that we can then say as an organization, you used to win because the context was different, but the context of tomorrow is shifted.
This is fascinating, and I'll tell you why. Because we're living in an era today where business leaders are happier to go on conferences and talk about the fourth industrial revolution. They're happy to talk about automation and roboticization. But the minute you mention color, wait, what?
Yeah.
And for me, it's strange that we're seeing those as different, when in fact, in truth, they are exactly the same. They are, how do you contend with different voices you've not known how to contend with in the past, or have not needed to contend with in the past? So here's a question for you guys. Have we actually transformed at all? And I ask that question flippantly, but I suppose what I'm saying is, maybe let me ask it this way. Between 1994 and 2006, South Africa spent 137 billion rand in BEE deals. So when corporates go, but we did transform, it's because they're looking at this grand total of 137 billion that went into these BEE transactions. And they took a couple of black people, they put them in the boardroom, and they said, ta-da! Transformation.
Yeah.
And then you and I come along, with our Queen's English and our private school education, and we go, what are you talking about? Like, you guys have not done it. So what is corporate missing on this piece of transformation?
I think this for me is, and I think there's a massive difference between transformation and change.
Correct.
There we go.
For me, transformation is if you take a look at a seed.
Right.
Seed, put it in the ground.
Right.
The next day, if it's a mealie meal, now that's transformation.
Right.
It looked one way, it looked completely different in another way.
100%.
What we've done in South Africa is we had a white poodle. It's semi-Dalmatian now, and we're thinking, no, the rest of us are going, but it's not a black Rottweiler.
Yeah.
It does not reflect the country.
Right.
So what we've done in South Africa is not transformed. For me, there'll be transformation the day someone has to go to Moria on pilgrimage, and that's considered a religious holiday.
Oh, wow.
Then we're saying now South Africa has transformed. That's my opinion.
Yeah. Let's add integration to that, right? Because I love this lens. So the idea of that we are integrating as a society is a fallacy. And the reason why I say that is because we then saying a particular group needs to integrate themselves into a particular group, and that's what we deem transformation. Because we're saying this stays the same. You
have to be like
assimilate.
it.
Correct.
You assimilate.
You need to
I
assimilate,
see.
right? And in order for you to assimilate, you need to look 1, 2, 3, behave in a certain manner and act in a certain manner so that you can integrate yourself into this. And this assimilation is what we call transformation. When in essence, what she is talking about is actually saying, take what we know here and take what we know here and create a new world that takes both cultural nuances and creates one view. Now we're then talking about a transformed South Africa because the lens is less about what you used to know and what I used to know, but it's about a new world that we've co-created together. And we haven't co-created anything in South
Have
Africa.
we even got organizational systems and policy to enable this? I mean, you're talking about a completely different way of working. You're talking about a completely different way of recruiting, for instance, right? You're talking about a completely different way of inducting teams. You're talking about setting a completely different culture of what can we say, what can't we say, like what is actually offensive and not. In my mind, it seems you're opening up a completely new can of worms. And the reason I say that is because to move from one reality and to adjust to a known reality is easier than to create something that none of us really know what it looks like. What then is the role, again, of the business leader in shaping what this new thing looks like?
For me, this is the interesting thing. If we're looking specifically at black business leaders, they live in both worlds.
Yes.
So it's not such a foreign concept. It's saying you no longer have to change your mannerisms and behaviors and way of engaging when you walk into the boardroom.
Yes.
You stay true to the way you'd be at home.
Yes.
You don't have to, the silly notion of stuff like philanthropy. With us as Africans, we don't believe in that.
rubbish, yeah.
It's if my next door neighbor hasn't eaten, I also haven't eaten.
Yeah. Yeah.
And not-
And you're certainly not going to put it on a CV.
No,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah.
It's expected of you.
100%.
So why does our corporate not reflect the culture across? For me, it's not purely a let's disrupt everything and it's not working. It's can we be authentic as Africans and have the way of doing business do the same?
Yeah. And how much courage do people have when they're sitting around the boardroom to have the honest conversation about the lack of transformation in those boardrooms? Number one, right? And how much voice do each of those people have in challenging the status quo of what has been discussed?
Yeah.
Because if you are going to have black leaders that are sitting in boardrooms and they bring themselves, but that itself is not exposed to the manner that it should be, then you actually lack the voice that provides that diversified view in terms of what is required for us as an organization to change. But also, so one example about you find a black executive and you put them into the head of transformation, but that person they find themselves in a space where they feel like they're dying because they thought they had this much power to be able to transform, and yet there is less power. So I think for me, in understanding that a new reality must be formed, it's understanding that in that new reality, we need new policies, we need new structures, we need a new different way of thinking that allows each point from each context to provide the voice. And I don't know that we've got that at the moment.
I just want to add to that.
Please
I
do.
think the biggest challenge with that as well is we're almost afraid from a societal perspective to be dynamic enough to do it.
Absolutely.
We see what the women did in Iceland, where they shut down the entire country and they said, if you guys don't come to the party, we're not coming to the party. And look how they were able to curb the financial crisis
that's
because they had diversity. I think the policy is very important, but unless the policy has been brought to life in day-to-day living, it means nothing.
Yeah.
We're going to take a quick break. So when we come back, just to cue your mind, I want to have a conversation about how do you give power and agency what is ignorance? Because there is a lot of ignorance in this conversation piece by people who have power, right? So and then therefore they either don't know how to exercise that power or they abuse it, right, in the wrong direction. And then how do you give agency to the people who, to your point, have perceived power? So I'm black, I'm in the room, I have the title, I just don't have the authority. I'm like the sheriff with the badge but not the gun. How do I drive this conversation piece so that it is non-adversarial, that we can find each other and find a common place to build a new reality? Let's have that conversation. Back after this. Welcome back to the IC Knowledge Bureau Fireside Chat. I'm joined by two incredible ladies, Vumile as well as Lucratia. We're talking about transformation, as broad and as specific as that subject matter is. So, ladies, before we went on a quick break, we were having a conversation about the intersections of transformation. I want to start first at the question and conversation around power and ignorance. Because it seems to me that the people who have the power are ignorant of how to use it. And the people who are without power lack the agency to use that power to drive the conversation piece of transformation. So maybe let me ask the question this way. I'm a white male. I am in my 50s. I'm a P&L manager. I have 600 people reporting to me. And I have, of the 612 were my direct reports. And you're coming to talk to me about this thing called transformation. What do I need to know about this conversation piece called transformation to make me less ignorant of why it's a necessity? Lucratia?
Yeah. Let me start with as far back as 1989.
Right.
A lady in the United States, and I remember her name, wrote about the intersection of race and gender.
Right.
Right? And this is
intersection of race and gender.
This is
Right.
she just left it there, right? This is 1989. Fast forward to 2018, my thought process is around, it's an intersection of race, gender, age, and even class. Right? So if you understand those intersections, you will understand why transformation or the conversation around transformation is important, but also what power lies within the different intersections that are there. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about a black, so that's race, female, that's gender, who is 32 years old, Vumile, who is also a CEO and an entrepreneur in her own right, and that is class, right? And so when you understand that perspective, it is easy to assume that a Vumile and a Lucratia are exactly in the same platform because she's black female, and so I look at her and I think we're exactly the same. What I don't know, and this is where the class is important, is that Vumile's father could have been a CEO of a conglomerate when she was 10 years old. And so who she is and what she is has been groomed since she was a very young girl.
I got you.
Right? And so at the dinner table, she was taught about stock markets. She was taught about investing. She was taught about how to handle herself and what etiquette means in a boardroom. Whereas Lucratia, at the age of 10, was playing, waiting for her mother, who is probably a maid somewhere, and she is doing the best that she can to raise Lucratia. And possibly, let's take it further and say Lucratia, at the age of 15, gets a bursary or a scholarship to go into a private school, and suddenly the accents are similar. Again, we assume it's the same person. But in actual fact, we need to dig deeper in the understanding of the different intersections that exist in order for us to empower ourselves in the understanding of what power means in transformation.
The hardest thing, Lisa,
Yeah.
the hardest thing though, is if I have power,
Yep.
and I've had it all of my life, I don't recognize I have it. Do you understand? Like
Yes.
if I'm a,
It's a hygiene
Yeah.
factor.
it's like
Yeah.
if I'm a white male, heterosexual,
Yeah.
and I grew up in a family where we have third, fourth, fifth generation managers or business people. This thing you're talking about called power, it's like breathing to me. So what are you talking about?
Yeah.
So how do I become aware that I have it? What do I need to have in my mind to recognize that I have this power?
I think for me, if I may,
yeah.
it starts with, so that's where unfortunately the onus is on the educated to educate the uneducated, right? So for me, it starts there. I think the onus at this point, and possibly for the last 24 years, and I don't know how many more years we need to do this, we need to start educating our privileged counterparts. And if, in order to educate our privileged counterparts, so first of all, there's the education, but there's also the willingness on the privileged counterparts to be willing to learn, right? That's the only time that they will actually comprehend what I'm talking about. Because you do find the privileged counterparts 24 years down the line who understand exactly what it means to be transformed, and those that don't understand, right? And it's easy for us to argue they're not willing to come to the party. But it could also be, and I'll take it back just a little bit in terms of us as black people. How much of ourselves do we know? How much of our privilege or the lack of privilege do we know and understand to the point where we are able to educate somebody who's sitting on the other side of the fence? And so if we haven't gone past our own education, how much more should we work towards educating the next person?
I wonder, Vumi, before you jump in, Lucratia, if we can make it real for the viewers,
Yeah.
how you and I met.
Yes.
Because I was promoting my book, my first book. You were in the audience.
Yeah.
And you asked me a question about my privilege.
Yeah.
And I must be honest, Vumi, like I was offended. I was like,
What privilege?
privilege, me. But it was when you broke down that privilege is layered. And you're like, dude, you're a black male.
Yeah.
Like, do you understand
Yes,
that
let's start there.
you have an advantage,
Absolutely.
a privilege over
Yes.
the black female?
Yeah.
And it was only when I started thinking about my own situation at home, and I was like, actually, I can't believe the stuff I get away with. Because to your point, I do have that privilege, right? But it wasn't until you made me aware of my own privilege that I thought, holy smokes. I've been running around pointing fingers at people saying transform, 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 transform. Whereas number one himself had to look back and go, so how am I thinking about transformation? Right? So even in my own firm, how do I think about how we build an organization that works for women? How do we build an organization that works for black women? If we have young women, for instance, who have to come into work using taxis, do we make adjustments for that? You know, do we expect them to work as I do until 8, 9 o'clock in the evening because that's the thing to do? You know what I mean? Vumi, on your end, I wonder if you're doing a lot of work in the rest of the continent now. How are you seeing the rest of the continent deal with this issue of diversity and inclusion?
For me, it's quite interesting because most of the work I do is actually with women.
Right,
And they tend to feel very empowered in their femininity.
right.
And it's not push-pull conversation. It's more collaborative. I'll give you an example. I had a meeting at EcoBank, and the woman brought food and the men brought food. It was a bring and share. And this is the executive level.
Wait. Men brought food?
Men brought food. I'm not sure who cooked the food. But food was brought.
Wow.
So the types of conversation happening on the rest of the on the continent is more of a, we need more women. But women tend to be empowered, a little bit more empowered than in South Africa. And they also don't have the sort of issues we have. Now, just back to what you were saying, Lucretia, but how do we have those conversations? And for me, it's a case of the carrot and the stick. The carrot is a case of here's the potential to the market and diversity and thinking and innovation. The stick is, if you don't change, what's going to happen? And I find these conversations here in South Africa, I'm in the coaching space, having to have conversations with middle managers about things like the reason your black graduates aren't staying is because they need more money. They have black tax. What's black tax? Now I'm educating. It might be better if you gave them more opportunities to travel. They're just like airplanes. No. It's because if he gets an opportunity to be in the Northern Cape, he doesn't have to only see home once a year. The conversation. So just by those slight adjustments, all of a sudden you're finding, oh, black grads are staying. Why? They want after the money. They want the experience. It's the pressures of society. So it's just fundamentally different that educational piece comes from open and honest dialogue.
So I'll tell you what vexes me. So in preparation for this discussion, I went and checked different literature and academic papers around broad-based black empowerment and its success, and how many of the JSE listed companies outperform from a returns and risk perspective, those that are compliant and non-compliant, right? So I skimmed through a couple. I think I got 4 articles. 2 are saying that compliant BE companies are necessarily outperforming the non-compliant, right? And this was done specifically in the financial sector, and the other one was in I think it was the retail sector.
Right.
And then another one was done in farming that said the exact opposite. And then the other one had inconclusive stats. And then I said, okay, what is wrong with this picture? And it took me a while. I slept on it, and when I woke up, I realized what's wrong with this picture is that we are trying to find the reasons why these companies must outperform those that are non-compliant.
100%.
Because we're trying to negotiate our way into the reasons why we should transform. I'm then asking the question, show me the stats that tell me that companies that are more diverse, that companies that are BE compliant are exponentially worse than companies that are not.
100%.
Because that conversation then tells me that this is not worth doing.
100%.
Because the discussion around whether we should transform as a country is it's a non-entity. It's a non-discussion. You've got 80% of your country looking in a certain way. And if that is the result, then you've got to have 80% of your organization looking in a certain way. You don't have that. The question now is, how much of an opportunity cost is it on you as an organization to actually get to look in that way? How much of an opportunity cost is it for people, all of us, to bring food into the boardroom because we all know that we have to eat? Whereas at this point, the onus is on a single entity to bring that casserole into the table because that's what we see you as, and that's it.
It's fascinating. I mean, I'm literally sitting here in my mind having a conversation with myself about this story you're telling about bringing food into the boardroom, and I'm realizing that actually it's less that the male is not willing to bring the food into the boardroom. It is that the male is thinking of himself as bringing something different. That's the toxicity. Actually, it's that when I bring the food, I'll bring the intellect. That's that's where the mindset is. That's why because when you said it, I thought, wait, what? Males brought food? Right? Because in my mind, I'm going, surely he should have been preparing for the meeting. And then I went, but why wouldn't you have been preparing for the meeting? Do you understand? There's almost like there's like a layer, an underlying layer. So we're 24 years into our democracy. No debating. White male, middle-aged, still dominates the board. There's just no debating it. If you were to give us 3 reasons why, what in your mind would it be?
Why they still dominate?
Yeah, absolutely. Why they dominate? Maybe let me put it to you this way: they dominate representativity. They dominate decision-making power to the extent to which actually it's disproportionate. and also dominate the rate of career progression.
Yes.
So the rate at which young white males move through the ladder far supersedes the rate at which young black males move through the ladder. And these are, by the way, young white males who went to school with those very same young black males. So it's not a function here of education. There is something else that is accelerating them through the ladder. What in your mind do you think is the reason for this?
And I think it goes back to what you were talking about with regards from a class perspective.
Yeah.
And I coach a lot of black females who are educated, they see A's, but they're just battling. And it's the conversations that were had with Friki when he was 2,
Yes.
I'm now having to have with you at 32. To say this is how you are to conduct yourself.
Right.
Did you think about this? Did you see this? Well, he had hands-on experience long before he walked into the boardroom.
Got you.
That's the first thing. The second thing is, a lot of decision comes from fear. People hire people who look like them.
Yes, of course.
Oh, you're one of us. Yes. That's why when you come in with this, Mary's English, or she's one of us.
Yes.
And when you don't, there's nothing in common here.
This is the assimilation,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Right.
Yes. So that inability to connect at that level and say, you're not like me. If you're not like me, you might want to take from me. Because historically, that's what my people have done.
Yeah.
They've taken from you.
Wow.
So there's fear there.
Yeah.
Massive fear there. And then the third is people are just afraid of change. If I am not in the boardroom, making sure that my 6 years generation worth of wealth is protected, where will I go?
Yep.
Will I pack my things and go to Australia or England?
Wow.
Yeah.
When did it become so deterministic? When did it become so I win, you lose, I win? Or has it always been that way? Maybe I wonder if maybe this is Zulungitin, you know, us who were taught and told by Mandela, no, we're fine now. Everything is everybody's the same now.
Yeah.
And then I'll give you guys a personal story. I didn't know I was black. I mean, I knew I was black, but I didn't know I was black until I got into corporate. I didn't know what that thing black meant. I went to school with white kids.
Yeah.
I competed and I beat them.
Yeah.
Fair and square. And if they beat me, good on you. So I didn't know this thing black was a tag. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, oh, you're black, until I got into corporate and I'd interact with a different generation. And all of a sudden, this black thing became, I was like, oh, so when you say black, it's not that you say it, it's this is what it means to you. And then, therefore, this is how you're going to treat me. It's similar, isn't it, on your question, Lucratia, about intersectionality around how we talk with women.
Yeah.
Like, oh, she's a, right?
Yeah.
Oh, no, you know, Lucratia is in our, you know, she's our HR manager. And
Yes.
It's almost expected that because she's an HR,
Yes.
she's the BE appointee, you know, she's going to enable us. She must just do the soft stuff. But please don't come with the hard stuff.
No.
No, right?
No.
I want to quickly just ask this question. What is the responsibility of those of us who are in those boardrooms to drive the conversation of transformation, no matter how uncomfortable it might be?
So let me go back to the question you posed to Vumi around what are the 3 things.
Yes.
Just to add,
Please,
just
please.
a little bit. So, number 1, sponsorship, and this answers this question you've just asked, but also to add sponsorship. So it's important for the people that are sitting within the boardroom to understand that they have broken into a certain layer that is not necessarily open to everybody around them, right?
Yeah.
And so they have a responsibility not only to educate the people around the table, but to sponsor those that are outside the boardroom so that they can bring them along the journey, right? That's one. And that sponsorship is very, very important. So you look at organizations, men in particular, black men in particular, have a lot of sponsorship. And black females don't necessarily have the similar sponsorship. And so you may find that Lucratia will start at work at the same time as Vusi does. She has exactly the same qualification, but fast forward 10 years later, Vusi might be Lucratia's boss, right? And that again is around, in the sponsorship, it's around how do you coach, mentor, and teach Lucratia to behave in a manner that integrates her into what is required into the boardroom. That's one, right? Secondly, I'm just going to lead you there. The idea that when Vusi, as a black guy, succeeds in the boardroom, he represents only himself.
Yes.
Is fantastic, right? Except when Vusi, as a black man, fails in the boardroom, he becomes a representation of all black people. And this is both black men
And
and
women.
black women.
Yes.
So now everybody carries the burden.
Everybody carries the burden. And so your failure becomes exponentially more than what you did. It becomes about, it actually affirms the one that did not believe that you could. And therefore, it closes the door to 1,000 more that are coming behind you, because the yardstick is now going to be, are you going to do what he did? Or do you need, how much more of a premium do I need to pay in order to be integrated into that boardroom after Vusi has failed? And so we discussed offline, the discussion around you have a single white person doing something bad, and that person is not a representation of all white
Everybody,
people.
yes.
The person is sick by themselves.
Yes.
They need
Yeah.
help.
I mean,
Yeah.
let's be real, isn't it? When
Yeah.
Marcus Jooste
Yeah.
runs a grand scheme fraud
Absolutely.
that costs the economy 200 billion rand.
Yes.
Just to be clear, we're talking about 1,000 Ngandlas, right? It's not the entire Afrikaner
It's
class
just
No,
him.
of
just
capital.
him.
It's
just
Marcus
him.
Jooste.
Absolutely.
Yet, when a VBS fails,
Yes.
All of
it's,
us.
wait a minute, these black people don't know how
Yes,
to run
they
banks.
don't know. We knew
Wow.
they didn't.
We forget that this is what Hassan has been doing it successfully prior.
Yes.
Unbelievable.
Yes. But we knew they didn't know. And Wasana was just him.
He was an anomaly.
He's brilliant.
Yeah.
He is brilliant.
So
He
he's
is-
not a representation of all of us.
No.
He's
He's
a
not.
representation of himself.
And yet
Yes.
VBS is a representation of all of us. So now let's look at the next black bank that is going to try and break into the oligopoly.
Unbelievable.
How much more of a premium are they going to be required to pay? Because now what they will need to do is to prove, first of all, that they understand the risk management of running a bank, but also that they understand what it means to play in this landscape, because clearly the other guys didn't understand that.
You know, this is so powerful because it doesn't matter actually what you do as a profession. If you're a person of color, it affects you.
Yes.
If you're a professional, you pay a premium for those who've come before you,
Yes.
who've done less than what was expected.
Yes.
If you're an entrepreneur, you pay a premium for those for whom opportunity was given, who did not succeed, which is in the complexion of entrepreneurship, by the way. If you are a corporate, it just doesn't matter what you do. You're always going to be paying this perpetual premium to prove that you are black, but not like the other blacks.
Yeah.
You know, is it fair, I suppose, is the question I'm asking. But more importantly, is it to be expected? Is this not how, and I'll say it, white people have been socialized?
So isn't it systematically constructed in any case?
Yes.
So when you look at the constructors of apartheid,
Yes.
what did they set out to do from
Yes,
the
yes,
beginning?
yes.
They
Yes.
set out to do exactly this.
Yes.
They set out to make sure that our education is not on par. They set out to make sure that we don't compete on the same playing field. They set out to ensure that we've got a fear and a lack of empowerment to the point where we know. So not only are we not going to educate you, we want you to know that you're not educated.
But there's one more thing, Wana Lucretia. There's just, not only are you, so we're not going to educate you,
Yeah.
we want you to know that you're not educated.
Yes.
But more importantly, we're going to socialize so deeply
Yes.
the idea that you are incompetent, that we don't need to tell you anymore.
No.
Your own people will.
Yes.
Right? Right?
Yes. Yes.
You're never going to meet the yardstick if the yardstick is to assimilate to whiteness, because your worthiness will constantly be questioned. So this entire notion of no, at some point it'll be enough.
Yes.
It's what you going back to what you were saying. Unless there's a fundamental systematic shift, we're never going to be enough.
You know, I do the best I can, and I'm not perfect, but I do try to make sure that in my ecosystem, I have as much money circulating in blackness as possible. So whether it's service providers, whether it's clients, whether it's people for whom I am a client, that you try to make sure that this thing circulates. And it is not without conscious effort.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This thing
Yes.
that actually, wait, what am I doing? I'm buying still water. Is there a black service provider who sells still water, right? Because the default is so easy to go, well, I need somebody to do systems integration. Let me call so-and-so. And I know so-and-so is white, they've got 30 years in the game. They'll give me a beautiful profile about stuff they've done for 30 years. Vumi's starting, she's been in this thing for 2 years. She had a corporate career after that. So it's like, I don't know. You know, I say, do 5 more years.
And call me.
And
Yes.
it's your thing,
Yes.
right, about what is the benchmark. And I suppose what I'm trying to ask is, so we can ask this of the system, that the system must transform. But should we not ask it of ourselves too?
I wanted to say that. So let me flip it on you. So when you look for water, you're comfortable to drink water because Vumi is in just entered the market and you can drink the water and comfortably feel it's okay. You have 100 million rand
Yes.
to invest.
Yes.
Where are you going to go? And why?
I'm going to the big asset managers. That's where I'm going.
Absolutely.
100 years in the game.
And what do they look like?
All of them in Cape Town,
Yes.
male, middle-aged, white.
There we go. And that's the thing. We have been socialized to believe that the construct cannot change. We've been socialized to believe that if you've done it for 100 years, you can do it for 100 years more, right? Which I understand, and I buy into the ideology that experience has taught you many lessons along the way. That you can actually create a risk management profile that allows you to be more averse than the guy who's just entered because that guy is learning. How many years do we need for us to create that 100 years? If we are not even willing to start, right? And we're not willing to invest in ourselves and those that look like us to actually bring them onto the journey of growth that we so talk about. So it's very easy for us to have a dialogue about transformation. And when we talk transformation, it is external to ourselves. But when we bring it back home, how many of us is like, I get sorry, Ishia's in. Yeah, let me just speak to Pete. When you are ready,
Yeah.
come and have a
100%.
conversation.
And we're not giving that feedback, even throughout the journey. One, that's interesting to me. And the second thing is, going back to your example, why is the skills not transferring yet?
Yes.
And this is where Congo's getting it right, personally, I'm seeing. They opened up their market a little bit. Okay, Congo's not the greatest example, but they opened up the market a little bit. They brought in guys like Vodacom, Orange, everyone. And they said within 5 years, the next CEO better be Congolese. And if it's not, we're pulling your licenses, get out. Very quickly, things changed. And they're successfully running businesses run by Congolese that had no skill set. How are they able to do that in 5 years? And we're 20 years
24
on.
years in, yeah.
Yes.
And we're still arguing about this.
How?
Yes. Yes.
How? When you're now my next door neighbor, but I still don't know what you know. How?
Okay, let's close it. I want to come back on the final segment, and I want to ask a question about what I call the Get Over It PowerPoint slide. We're back after this. Thank you so much for joining us in the IC Knowledge Bureau FireSide Chat. We've been having a conversation about transformation, diversity, and how do you include the excluded. So, ladies, I wondered if we can maybe just tailor our conversation with this conversation, please. It is not uncommon that when we're having the conversation about our transformation, typically the first response is one of eye rolling, the idea that we're whinging and we're moaning. And then you hear people go, well, you've had 24 years. When are you going to get over it and just move on with it? Is that fair? Should we just get on with it?
No. So let's start with, there's the idea that South Africa is unique in everything.
Yes.
It's not.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So let's take initiatives like BEE. Malaysia did exactly the same
Yes,
thing.
indeed,
It's similar, right?
Yes.
And it took them over 20 years to get it right. What are we learning from there? It takes more than 2 decades to get it right. We're 24 years into our democracy. We didn't implement BEE in 1994. We implemented it in 2003. So if we had just to use the time frame to have the discussion, then we need to understand the discussion around what it actually means. Secondly, when they got it right because they didn't just empower the institutions, they empowered the people. And how you empower the people is through a proper constructed education to the citizens of the country. Our education system is something to be frowned upon
Indeed, yeah.
in saying it in the
Politely,
politely,
yeah.
right? And we assume that with that education, this very same individual should, after 10 years or after 15 years of education, be able to get into the boardroom and argue against somebody who went to private school.
I hear you.
And so I'm going to pose it
hear
to
you, yeah,
everyone
yeah.
as to why do we need private schools? Why are there private schools in South Africa? And I know it's a very radical sort of like mind shift, but I'm going to ask the question, if you do not, so as Lucratia, I can afford to take my child to private school.
Yes.
And so what motivation do I have to look at non-private schools in South Africa and want to lend a helping hand if it doesn't affect me on my day-to-day? If it doesn't require me to look at my child and ask myself the question, what are you being taught at school? Why is it being taught to you at school? Who are you going to be at the end of the day? And yes, I am a product of a private school. But again, how many people have been afforded the same opportunity that I've been?
You know, I have a dear friend of mine, Sizwe Mpofu Welsh, wrote a book, Democracy and Delusions, and he has a very powerful quote. He says, apartheid didn't die, it was privatized.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Wow, he's like, if you don't want to go to a public hospital, you get medical aid, you go to a private hospital.
Absolutely.
If you don't like public education, you go to a private school. If you don't like public transport, you buy a car. It didn't die, it was just privatized. It just created a separate little ecosystem where it can thrive. Vumi, what's your view when you hear people say get over it?
Enraging. KuvubuZulu nje nolaka. Get over it to me says, let's pretend that all things are now equal.
Yeah,
If all things are now equal, feel free to move from Sandton to Alexandra.
yeah,
If all things are now equal, are you comfortable walking to Wamash and starting a business?
yeah,
Or do you need to be in Sandton?
yeah, yeah.
Once we get to that place, where it's just as common seeing any person of color at local and jumping into a taxi, then for me, I'm like, I'm over it.
Yes.
Prior to that, no. It shows that things are not equal.
Yes.
If you are still in the space where you live in a country with 11 official languages and you speak comfortably only one, you're not yet as integrated as you could be in the society that surrounds you. How do we begin to get over that? Because in essence, it's easy to say that because everyone else has to assimilate into your world. You never get to play in theirs.
It's somebody said this comment to me about the reason I asked it about the get over it, and I said to them, so why is it that it makes the news when there's a white squatter camp?
Yes.
This democratization of things, then it must be democratization of poverty too. We can't just democratize opportunity when it suits you. Then you must democratize everything.
All things should be equal.
Right. So to your point, if I'm driving and the guy who's going to stop me at Greyston and want to wash my windscreen is a white guy, and next to him are 4 other black guys, if that demographic represents the country, then I'm happy to get over it because it means, and I'm not saying that we should make white people poorer, but I am saying there should be an equal representation across the strata of society for us to go, okay, now we're over it, right? Because I must equally infer that there's going to be the same representation at the top layers of society too.
And this for me, this has always been my little benchmark, is when I say, oh, Jacques, of any CEO, you'd be like, which one? Celia's or... If I say 40, you know exactly which one I'm talking
exactly
about.
what I'm talking about.
Why?
Yeah.
Yeah,
It should be a case of when we say, oh no, Boitumelo, oh, which one?
yeah.
Then we like, now we're starting to become equal.
Yeah. I think for me is, if I can talk about a black child in the middle of a township, walking to a good school, walking. Not taking a taxi, not being in the parents' car, but walking to an excellent school. That is transformation for me. That then says, I'll get over it. But if I can also then say that child, when they get to school, and the class of 20, 9 of them or 11 of them are white, then we're talking the fact that South Africa has gotten beyond it. Because my problems as a black child are Jacques' problem as a white child. And so our problems at South Africa is our problem. I think when just the example of the white guy cleaning the windscreen, for me then says, when you get to the traffic light, and that is the situation. It forces the mindset to move beyond the class and the race
100%.
into a solution mode,
100%.
into why is this even happening? Why do we allow this to happen? And it gets beyond those people to us. And we don't have an us. I'll just close with this. I remember I was in class and they were talking about what Mandela has done for us, and it was a huge debate. And they were talking about, so you've got children sitting in a room and they're playing with toys. The one guy doesn't want to borrow the other child the toy, and we sort of like, and the obviously the one with the toy is the white kid. And I said to the lecturer, what you're not understanding is that when the father, who's now Mandela, came in, he said, stop fighting. What he didn't do is to take the toy. Rip it into half,
You say you have half,
and
you
say
have half.
you have half, you have half. You now can see what's to fit, right? What he then said is stop fighting, spoke to each of them individually in a nice manner, and said play nice, and walked out.
Wow.
While I respect the old man, and I absolutely love what he's done for this country, the context of which was very different to where we are right now.
Indeed.
What we need is somebody to walk into that room and actually say, either I rip this toy apart or I take it away completely. Because the idea that you're now both not going to have it is going to force the both of you to work together to keep it. Rather than if I say I'm going to walk in, calm you down and walk out.
There you have it. That's why we have these conversations, to get you thinking in a different way, but more specifically to inform those of us who are in positions of power, authority, and privilege, to be mindful of how you exercise your power, to be respectful of how you exercise your privilege, but most importantly, to have a sense of consciousness, much greater than yourself, about how you create spaces for those in the past for whom spaces were not created. Remember this, transformation is not a black issue, it's not a white issue, it's a South African issue. Because sooner or later, the question of transformation, not answered, becomes a deep social problem about which we all have to face issues of instability. I wish you the best in framing your own spaces. Thank you very much for joining us.